Let's talk about Call of Duty Finest Hour.
Hail the German! This is the cry of your Russian earth! Do not waver! Do not let up! Kill! Death to the German invader!
Hello and welcome to episode 2 of my retrospective on the Call of Duty campaigns. I reviewed the first game and its expansion many moons ago, and intend on doing all of the campaigns up to and including Call of Duty Ghosts, which marks the end of the console generations I'm focusing on, the 6th and 7th generations of video game consoles. In other news, I'm back to my old delivery of narration. I tried something new on my Enslaved video, but I ended up sounding like MandaloreGaming if you had spent high school listening to the Smiths and smoking cigarettes near the dumpster behind the cafeteria instead of studying Warhammer lore. But that's enough window dressing. Let's get back to the game at hand. Call of Duty Finest Hour was the first Call of Duty game to be released on consoles. It was released as a standalone title that is loosely based off of the original Call of Duty, but it is very much a full game in its own right. It was released in 2004 for the Xbox and PlayStation 2. I'm reviewing the PS2 version right now on an emulator called PCSX2. Any performance issues you see here are results of the emulator running the game poorly, as it runs perfectly fine on original hardware. However, I do own the physical copy of this game and a PlayStation 2. Let's just take a minute to admire this sexy box. I'm gonna level with you here. This was the first Call of Duty game I played, and I'm very nostalgic towards it, so I know I wouldn't have the same feelings towards it if I played it for the first time now. That being said, this is still a very good game, and a blast to play through for many reasons, and I would even personally rank it higher than the original Call of Duty for the PC. Now Creamy, you may interject, what is the basis of the heresy of which you speak, brother? Well, let me assure you that, though this is just my opinion, it's not entirely gleaned from rose-tinted goggles of nostalgia, as I am more than prepared to back it up. The graphics and resolution scaling are better on the original Call of Duty, but that's not saying much because the PS2 was not by any means a powerful console. The average gaming PC at the time blew the PS2 and Xbox out of the water in terms of hardware, so of course the graphics for the console port are going to be worse. That being said, I think Finest Hour actually has a much better atmosphere that portrays the chaos of war a lot more accurately. You're immediately thrown into a dark battlefield that's lit up only by burning buildings and artillery flying through the air at the start of the Russian campaign, in the battle for Stalingrad. It's basically a recreation of the beginning of the Russian campaign in the original game. But I think this one is far more intense because there are shells barraging the battlefield and there's more ambient and seemingly random noise in the background that makes the chaos feel more all-encompassing. In the original game, it was much brighter out and the density of sound effects was a lot lower, while the sound effects themselves had more of a pattern to them. So the chaotic feel of the battle was lessened as it felt more engineered. The buildings, though burning, weren't complete infernos like they are here. That's just one example of this game doing a better job at conveying the proper atmosphere of war. Everything just felt more organic, chaotic, less choreographed. So in short, I give the points to Finest Hour for presentation, even though Call of Duty 1's graphics, animations, and resolution scaling are far superior. As for the gameplay, the ball is firmly in the court of Call of Duty 1. The controls are much tighter because you have the keyboard and mouse instead of a controller, and the guns feel a lot more satisfying to fire and are far more accurate than the guns in Finest Hour. You just feel more in control of everything around you, which is nice. The movement controls and the controls for jumping and crouching are also far easier to use. Finest Hour has terrible control, not just in comparison to Call of Duty 1, but just in general. Sure, it's serviceable for a console shooter, but you're never going to beat the keyboard and mouse. The aim assist feels wonky, and the controls for crouching, going prone, interacting with objects, reloading, and standing back up just don't feel natural. There are also some rifles that just straight up don't hit where you're trying to aim from a certain distance. It made the British campaign frustrating because the Springfield rifle was the worst with this. Another thing is the checkpoint system. Finest Hour has some abysmal checkpoints. If you die, you're most likely going to start from the beginning of the stage, or the halfway point if it's a longer level. The original game had quick saves and a robust checkpoint system, so this wasn't a problem for that game. All in all, the point for gameplay goes to Call of Duty 1, no contest. The story, on the other hand, is a different, story. Call of Duty's story was very minimalistic, but did a few things to add some variety here and there. The best story in that game was the British campaign, as it put you in the boots of a pilot who had transferred over to the SAS after being rescued by the Dutch resistance led by one Major Ingram. It stood out to me as an above-average tale, whereas the other two storylines were more or less go from one battle to the next. It also introduced the iconic character Captain Price. but this time a World War II version of him, who also returned in Call of Duty 2. Finest Hour, on the other hand, is drowning in this type of storyline, and I just adore it. The Russian campaign, for instance, has you jumping seamlessly from protagonist to protagonist, where you start off as the private Alexander Sokolov, then you play as the sniper Tanya Pavlovna, and finish off as the tank commander Nikolai Badanov. The protagonists are fully voiced and have their own personalities, which is refreshing because it's weird to have silent protagonists in a war game. There are also some standout characters as well, such as Sergeant Starkey in the British campaign, which was ironically the worst campaign as it had the least story and a very abrupt ending. Brian Johnson from AC/DC took a break from singing the same song over and over again to voice Sergeant Starkey, which adds a lot of personality to an otherwise bland campaign. The narrative for each campaign also ties a lot of the missions together and makes them feel exciting and fresh each time you go from one stage to the next. I know story takes a backseat for a lot of people when it comes to shooters, but I think it's an important aspect of the game to talk about because Call of Duty has always been known for its more story-focused campaigns. It's also more important to me personally, because I'm not satisfied with just shooting at the schnitzel packers. I want to know the character's personal motivations for wanting to fight the members of the funny Windmill Brigade. In conclusion, Call of Duty 1 and Finest Hour are both really good games that still hold up today. If you want to check them out because you're curious about the history of the series, you can't go wrong with either one. Play Call of Duty if you're more focused on gameplay, or play Finest Hour if you're more interested in atmosphere and story. If you're unsure, play both. I wouldn't say one is objectively better than the other, but I personally am more focused on things outside of the realm of raw gameplay when it comes to this kind of video game, which is why my vote goes towards Finest Hour. Alright, that's all and thanks for watching. I'll be focusing heavily on PlayStation 2 games for the time being, so stay tuned for more reviews on some nostalgic games and more obscure titles that may have flown under your radar back in the day. Sergeant Creamy, out.